FlossTube. My name is Laura and I am the Nerdy Needle. I'm so glad you decided to join me here today on my FlossTube channel. Before I forget, because I always forget, please make the algorithm gods happy by commenting, liking, and subscribing this video. This is the second video in my series of 10 that I have planned out in my video series that I'm calling Introduction to Counted Cross Stitch 101, 102, and 103. I am having such a good time doing this. I really am. I'm a former high school science teacher, and one of my favorite things that I did as a teacher was planning lessons and curriculum design. So basically, I would have an end goal, like a unit that I needed to teach, and I'd say, okay, I want all my students to know this thing at the end of the unit. How do I lead them there? What are the steps that I need to take with them to guide them to the point where they can master that content at the end? So it's a bit like having a pretty lake or a nice view on a hike that is the end point of your hike, and I'm leading my students along on this hike to that end goal. And I have to decide whether we're turning left or right, or remind them to step over that log so they don't fall on their face, that type of a thing. It's a guided journey. And so I'm applying those same skills to designing this cross-stitch class, with the end goal being you being able to stitch on any kind of fabric, any kind of design, whether it's a sampler or a primitive, a pretty lady, or a full coverage heaven and earth designs, or an almost full coverage. There are a bajillion different options out there, and I want to get you to the point where you have enough skills and you have enough techniques down that you can delve into any project that you like. The starting point is for students who, or for stitchers who have actually never stitched before. So I'm starting at the very beginning, but the content is essentially an overview of the most of the techniques used in counted cross stitch. Pretty much everything that I've ever seen on FlossTube is going to be built into this series of 10 videos. So it is designed for absolute beginners, but because it's a complete overview of counted cross stitch with most of the techniques, it's also designed for more experienced stitchers. If you are just looking to see different techniques for ending a thread or starting a thread, or how does a laying tool work, that is all going to be compiled in this video. In the description box below, I'm going to have timestamps for every section of every video, so you can just jump to whichever bit that you want. I've actually been seeing quite a few FlossTube videos, and as I've been watching those in the background, just like most people do as I've been doing my own stitching, I see a lot of people using Q-snaps. And this is a Q-snap. It's basically just a plastic frame with some clips on it, and you can stretch your fabric pretty tight on this thing. And so I see a lot of people stitching with this, and most everybody I've seen holds it in one hand and then stitches with the other. And in the comments that I've seen from the video, the person making the video, or people commenting on the video, I've seen quite a number of people talk about how they don't know how to stitch two-handed. And then other comments are talking about how after a longer period of stitching, the wrist starts getting sore, because a lot people will use a bigger fabric. If their project is bigger, they would have the entire fabric, of course, and then they just put the Q-snap on one section, and then they just move the Q-snap to a different section and then another different section as they progress through their work. So you can end up having a pretty big piece of fabric that you're holding with your Q-snap, and so if you're holding it in your hand for hours and hours, you can imagine that your wrist is going to start getting a bit sore. And I've seen quite a number of comments about sore wrists. So those two things together got me thinking about Q-snap users and thinking, well, if you watch my videos and follow along with them, I'll teach you how to stitch two-handed. So then you can move away from having to hold your Q-snap in your hand giving your wrist a break. And in my opinion, being able to stitch two-handed, in my own stitching, honestly, that was the game changer. That's when I went from enjoying stitching to absolutely loving stitching. That's when I went from nice results to spectacular results. And that's what turned me into an avid cross stitcher. Before then, I kind of dabbled. Now I'm avid. So I'm kind of passionate about showing people how to stitch two-handed because it's such a great skill, and it's really not that difficult to master. So I'm keeping Q-snap users in mind as I'm designing this class. In Cross Stitch 102, which is when we shift over to stitching on Aida, this consideration of Q-snap users will continue because I'm going to be looking at and discussing different types of lap stands and floor stands that you can use, and keeping in mind that there are all these Q-snap users out there. So thinking about what kind of stand can you get that you can just put your Q-snap on, and now you have your hands free so that you can stitch two-handed. So that will be coming up in 102, and I'm already pondering those questions and planning that part out. These Mill Hill kits that we're using, so these things are what this Cross Stitch 101 is going to use. These things are great. The reason I'm using them is because you're stitching on perforated paper. And so with a simple setup like this is just a Loran magnetic board. It's just a piece of steel and some rare earth magnets. You can stick your perforated paper, see, that's the perforated paper. You can stick it off the edge of like a table like this, and because it supports itself, you can stitch on this two-handed. So it's a really simple and inexpensive way to try out the skill to see if it's something that works for you. And if it does, then you can start investing in a floor stand or a lap stand, because those are more expensive. I really like this because this is such a simple setup, and it doesn't need a big outlay of money at the beginning before you really have had a chance to try it and see if it works for you. So that's basically where we're at with my class. This video number 2, is all about kitting up your project. So going from the kit in the bag to having everything laid out and ready for your first stitch. The next video is the one where we're actually going to start actually stitching together. So if you're stitching along with me, you'll need to have everything kind of prepped and ready to go, because that video is going to be all about putting that first stitch and starting to learn the techniques needed to be able to complete one of these cute little Mill Hill kits. So I hope you like what I have to show you here, and that you will subscribe to my channel and follow along. I do have a request. One of the things I've been thinking about is the fact that this is a one-way communication here with me talking at a camera. And I'd like to have some sort of place where people can post their work or ask questions. And obviously the place is either going to be Facebook or Instagram. I've kind of been boycotting Facebook a little bit. I have an account that I never use. I will be willing to use it for this. I'm just not sure which one to go with, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, which one would be more conducive to having kind of a community where people can share what they're doing and also contact me with questions. So if you have any ideas or suggestions on how I should do that, I would really appreciate you put some comments, put a comment in the section below so that I can get going on that also. Finally, I do have a website that's also in the box below, and that has all of this information all compiled together. And also on my website, I have a Stitcher's Dictionary with a long list of stitching terms, and a bunch of them have links to actual techniques and products, so you might want to check that out. So again, welcome to my class, and I hope to see you again. Reading a cross-stitch chart is very straightforward. This is the chart for my very own pattern. I designed this. 2 means needles. This is the cover for a needle case that I'm making. In the chart, you'll see these bold boxes. Each one of these is a 10 by 10 square. So we know that this is 10, 20, 30, 40, just off of that. If you need to figure out how wide and how tall your entire pattern is, that's something that you have to do if you're buying fabric separately. You'll want to count up the middle 10 blocks and then count up these and then add these to it to figure out how wide and tall your exact dimensions for your pattern are. Each one of these is a symbol for a different color. The symbols are converted to colors on the key, so you know which symbol represents which color. You'll also get specialty stitches like right here. This is a ladybug. The antennas on the ladybug are in backstitch. You have these centering triangles on the side and the top. This is something that you will need to use to find the center of your chart. So you follow the arrows until they intersect, and that tells you where the center of your chart is. You're going to find the center of your perforated paper, and that's going to help you find your starting stitch. Looking at the key, on your key, you have the symbol, you have the thread color. DMC is the most popular brand of floss. It's the stuff that you get in all the big box craft stores. You get the color description. This is going to be really important for you as you're sorting your Mill Hill kit floss, because the colors have qualifiers in them. So blue, violet, very light. This one's just light. The kit that I was sorting, there was a blue, a dark blue, a very dark blue, a light blue, a very light blue, and a very, very light blue. And those qualifiers were really useful in identifying which color was which. It also tells you how many strands of floss you're going to use for stitching that color. It's almost always 2. The length would be important if we had to go buy floss separately for a kit, but because this is a kit that you're going to be using, we don't care about the length because Mill Hill has taken care of that for us. So that's what a key looks like. I'm just going to show you 2 examples from an actual Mill Hill chart for the beads and how they deal with the beads. So beads will also have a symbol and a color. The beads are bagged in separate bags, and these little symbols at the end tell you which color beads are combined together in a bag. And that just helps you identify which color is which. It tells you the bead color. And then under here it says floss color. It says light green. So up here in the floss part of the chart, of the key, I would find the light green. I would use that to stitch this bead on, this Christmas green bead on. That's hard to say. And I would use a half cross stitch to do it, and I need 2 strands for it. For the opaque moss, it's in a different bag. That's why there's a plus there instead of the asterisk. I'm going to look for the very dark green color, which is up here in my key. So I'll figure out which color that is. I'll pull that, and I'm going to half cross stitch the opaque moss color on with 2 strands. So that's how you deal with the beads. It's all very, very self-explanatory and straightforward. I'm going to explain to you how you can convert your paper chart into a PDF that you can then annotate inside of a PDF reader. The one that I use is called GoodReader. So this is a photograph of the printed out paper chart. Remember, this is my own design. So I took a picture of the chart, the key, and pretend that this is the photograph from the front of your chart. This is the actual stitched up version of my pattern. I left this in this way because you can see there's a big old shadow in the bottom left corner. Not a big deal on that one, but imagine having a big old shadow on your pattern that you're going to be using quite a bit. I'm speaking from personal experience. It's worth the time to make sure that this is a high quality photograph, that it's square, it's not at an angle, and all the rest of it. So it's worth putting it into your photo editor and straightening it up, so making sure that it's a good picture. On these paper charts, because they're folded, you fold it back on itself so that it's nice and flat and you don't have any curves, that type of a thing. Then you're going to go into the app. It's called GoodReader. It's right there. The navigation is on the bottom. So the first thing you'll do is just make a folder. I'm going to call this FlossTube Examples. Go into the folder, and then again, manage files, import photo and video. FlossTube Examples, and I'm just going to pick those three. I'm going to import them. So now it's imported. These are still in photograph file form, so I need to convert this to a PDF. So I click on the chart. Down here in the share button, this is the piece that is in that Pro Pack, this convert to PDF feature. I would convert the chart and the key. You don't need to do it for the photograph of the project. And then in the bottom right corner is that PDF. Convert it, and now you have it as a PDF. So there's the chart and there's the key. So how can you annotate these things? Well, when you go to sort your floss, you can do something like pick the freehand tool, which is down there. Now it says first time editing this file. I always just save to the original file because I can easily convert it again if I need to. So as you're sorting through your floss and putting them on your floss organizer, you can just mark these off as you put them on to make your life a little bit easier. So that's a way that you could mark up your key. On the chart, this is where you're going to spend the majority of your stitching time, of course. You can mark off your stitches as you're doing them. If you make a mistake, you can erase. The markup tools are always on the right. Notice that sometimes they just disappears off to the side. To get it back, you just tap the middle of the screen and then it brings it back. One thing that you're going to need to do on your chart just to get set up to start stitching is to find the center of your chart. Remember, you have your centering tools, which are the bold triangles. So I'm actually going to mark the center of my chart. I'm going to pick a different color. Let's go with red. You can also change like how thick the line is. You can change the opacity. So there's a lot of features that you can adjust on this for whatever that you want to do. So to find the center of your chart, you just follow the two arrows until they meet, which is right there. And I'm going to save that because I want to have that as a reference. And then you're going to need to figure out how many stitches to the left and up this upper corner is, because that's where you need to count to so that you can count it out on your perforated paper so that you'll know that from below that down at the angle right there is going to be your first stitch. So what you're going to do is count. So this is 10 here. That's 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So this is 25 out to the side there, out to the left side, and then we're going to count all the way up to that corner, so I know that this is 10, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So that's 31. So now I know that on my perforated paper, once I find the center of it, I'm going to count 25 over to the edge and then up 31, and that's going to get me to that upper left stitch, and then down diagonally from there, that's where I'm going to place my first stitch if I was stitching this pattern. So those are the ways that you can annotate this for marking off your stitches. Oops. Other things that you can do are, there's a typewriter feature. So something that I'll do sometimes is just put the date, and you can move this around. You kind of hold it down and then it'll start moving. Or if you bring up the little menu, there is the move right there, and then you can move it. You kind of have to get a feel for getting the whole thing to move together, but it's pretty straightforward. Something that I've done is, or I've actually just recently started doing, is like if I'm stitching one day, I'll stitch in green, and then I'll switch to yellow and, you know, do my yellow, and then, oops, get back here. No, I wanted my typewriter, and then, you know, say which day I did that. So I have kind of a record of the days that I stitched different colors. So I'll do something like that. But there's a lot of features that you can use on this. Things that don't work on it, the highlighter doesn't work. So some of these don't work on the right there in that menu. Because this really isn't it's not recognizing it as a like text file, and so like the highlighter doesn't work. You can see it says no text under figure, so it won't recognize that. But you don't really need that because you just use that freehand tool to cross out your stitches. So that in a nutshell is how you can annotate your patterns. One thing I would do is, if you plan on canceling that Pro subscription, make several copies of your chart so that you have them. You'll use actually 2 for sure, because one you'll cross off your stitches, and then the second one you'll use for your beading. So this is how you use GoodReader to annotate on a PDF of your stitching chart. Here's the contents of one of these buttons and beads kits. It's got the photo. I'm going to be doing this Playful Penguins pattern. It's got some beads with a couple of needles. There's a beading needle in there, and then a regular embroidery or tapestry needle. They bag up the beads in 2 separate bags so that you can figure out which color is which. You get this cute little novelty bead or button. And of course you get the chart and the big wad of floss. So I'm going to kind of show you how I go about sorting through this floss. So I'm going to move all of this out of the way. So here's all our floss, all those pretty colors. So what I do is I just start separating that out based on just main color categories. Okay, so I have my floss kind of separated out into main colors. So what I always do is I just deal with the very clear-cut colors first, and I put them on my little organizer. And all you do is you take the floss, so I have black, and it's going to be that color or that symbol. And then all you do is you fold the floss in half and you hook it on the little peg and slip it between the little foam things. So I'm going to put the rest of these on and then I'll be back. So here are all my floss colors all sorted out. I just want to show you a few little tricks. When I sort my floss colors, I pick out the really easy colors first, and then I'm left with the really similar ones, which were these light blues and the white. And especially this very, very light blue is incredibly similar to the white. So if you put them right next to each other, and something that I'll do is I'll just lay it across my finger and kind of pull it tight, and then you can really see that these are actually two colors. I'll have my finger for a light color and then a dark color, just to double check for contrast to sort these, because sometimes it's a little tricky to get to figure out the colors because they're really, really subtle shades. But I think I have all of those. So I've got all of my floss organized. The last thing I'm going to do is braid the tails so that they don't tangle. You don't need to tie the end or anything like that. You can just kind of leave it and it'll flop open a little bit, but it's not a big deal. So there's all my floss ready to go. The next step is to find the center of your paper so that you can count over to your starting stitch location. You're going to do that on the back. Just going to use a straight edge and just connect corner to corner. You don't need to go all the way out to the end because you're just looking for the middle. And do it the other direction. And then here I just mark it. So there's my center stitch. Make that very clear. Now I need to count 37 over and 37 up. And this is one of those things where you have to get it right. With these kits, the way that the frame works, if you're off by more than a stitch, it's going to get hard to center it correctly in the frame. So when you do this counting, you need to repeat the count, and I would triple check it. So it's counting over 37. So what I do is I'll mark the paper every 10. And then recount that 10, and then do the next 10, recount that 10, and so on. So I've counted 37 over, 37 up, triple checked it, and this is where my first stitch is going to be. So when we start stitching, it's going to be up here, and I can just figure out where that first stitch goes from what's on the back. So that's how you figure out your first stitch location. Organize your stitching table something like this. So you need your damp sponge. I have it in this lid. A little box for your stray bits of floss when you finish a thread. We've got a needle threader, embroidery scissors. This is that magnetic pin cushion that you can stick needles into like this so that you can just easily grab needles as you need them. I also keep my Snag and Abbott there. If you don't want to get one of those, you can get just a regular ordinary pin cushion like this. But I like this one because it's magnetic. And if you take Cross Stitch 102 with me, if you do that project also, you're going to need one of those. So you might as well get one now. I have my sorted floss with the tails braided. My magnifier is in the back there, and then my iPad with my pattern. The business end of this whole setup is this Loran magnetic board. I just have it taped down on my table. This is actually one of those lap desks with the pillow on the back. I used to use this for all my grading. So if you tape it down on a table, make sure that the tape isn't going to damage the finish on your table. You're going to put your perforated paper on the edge of the stand or this board. And this thing, you can slide out all the way to the edge and you can see that it just supports itself. So even that very first row of stitching, which is going to be way up at the top here, you can pull this out all the way and you can stitch right here. You're going to hold this on with some of these rare earth magnets. We have the flat kind, which is nice because it doesn't catch your thread as you're stitching, but it's a little bit more difficult to move. You kind of have to drag it off of it and like grab it at the edge here. These guys are easier to pick up, but they catch the floss a lot more, so it's a trade-off. If you're a right-hander, you're going to want the flat magnet over on the right side because that's where you're going to be working with your right hand. So because this is self-supported, this perforated paper, you can put your dominant hand underneath, your non-dominant hand on the top, and you can just pass your needle back and forth between your hands. And that gives you two-handed stitching, which in my opinion is one of the most important skills I can teach you in doing cross stitch. It's just a way more efficient, way more enjoyable, in my opinion, way of stitching. So you need something that looks like this. You'll want to really pay attention to the height. You're going to be doing your stitching for longer periods of time, so you don't want to end up with a backache or a neck ache. So playing around with how high you set this up. You could put books under this or a couple of pieces of lumber, a couple of 2x4s. So, you know, use your imagination to figure out how to get this at the ideal height so that it's comfortable for you to stitch. Make sure that you have a comfortable chair so that you need it to be reasonably ergonomic so that you're not going to get all sorts of aches and pains from doing this. But this is the setup that we're going to use. And the next video, we're actually going to start talking about how you place that first stitch and how you actually go about stitching.